Are you ready to get better at reading people? Because today we're diving deep into You Can Read Anyone by David J. Lieberman. I think a lot of us want to understand what makes people tick, right? Like, not just the surface stuff, but how do their thoughts and feelings really actually affect what they do?
And that's exactly what this book is all about. It's really practical. It goes way beyond, just basic body language. It gives you these really specific techniques for understanding someone's true intentions.
Okay, so not quite mind reading, but getting pretty close.
Exactly. I like to think of it as speed reading people. It's like Lieberman is giving us a cheat sheet for human behavior.
Ooh, I love a good cheat sheet. Okay, so tell me about some of these techniques. What really stood out to you?
Well, one that I thought was pretty clever is called the mind reader. And it's all about using a verbal kind of Rorschach test to figure out how comfortable someone is with a sensitive topic.
Okay, wait, like those ink blot tests? How does that work with words?
It's all in how you phrase the question. So let's say you're a manager and you suspect that Jill, one of your employees, is stealing office supplies. Instead of accusing her directly, you could say something like, Jill, it's come to my attention that people have been taking office supplies home. Any ideas on how we could stop this?
Interesting. So you're not accusing her, but you're putting it out there and watching how she reacts.
Exactly. If she's innocent, she's probably going to be pretty engaged, offer solutions, want to help. But if she's guilty, even if she denies it, you might see some discomfort leak out in her body language or how she phrases her response.
That's subtle but clever. It's like you're letting their subconscious do the talking. What other techniques did you find intriguing?
Well, behavioral baseline is another good one. It's based on the idea that everyone has these little subconscious habits, right? Like little things they do without even thinking about it. And any change from that baseline can be a really big clue to their underlying feelings.
Okay, I need a real-world example of this. Paint me a picture.
All right, so picture this. You're a mediator in a really tense negotiation. After the agreement's been reached, you casually offer each party a pen to sign. Maybe you've got a black pen and a blue pen. Seems pretty harmless, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a choice of pens. What's the big deal?
Well, you as the mediator are watching which color each person consistently chooses. So if someone keeps picking the black pen, maybe they have some negative associations with the meeting, they're not really happy with the outcome. Someone repeatedly grabbing the blue pen might feel more positive about it. It's all about those subconscious links we make.
It's like you're turning everyday objects into secret decoders for human behavior. That's pretty cool.
It is, and it highlights the power of really paying attention, being observant. Of course, context is key, too. You need to combine these techniques with other observations and your understanding of the person's overall demeanor.
Makes sense. It's not just one magic bullet, right? You're piecing together different clues. Now, the book also gets into the deeper psychology behind how people make decisions, and that's where things get really interesting, at least for me.
Absolutely. Lieberman introduces this framework called SNAP, self-esteem, needs, attitude, and perception.
SNP, that's catchy. I like it.
Yeah.
So how does SNAP help us to understand people better?
Well, the idea is that while people are complex, we tend to follow some predictable patterns when it comes to our behavior because of our core psychological needs. And it's not about labeling people, it's about understanding the why behind their actions.
Okay, and self-esteem is a big part of this, right? How does self-esteem fit into the SNA picture?
It's the foundation. It's like, think of self-esteem as a filter. That shapes how much of reality we actually let in and how much we distort, to protect our ego.
So you're saying people with different levels of self-esteem might actually see the world differently?
In a way, yeah. People with high self-esteem tend to make similar choices because they're not letting their ego get in the way as much. They're more likely to just act according to their values and do what they think is right.
That makes sense. It's like they have a clearer view of what matters to them. What about people with low self-esteem? How does that play out?
Well, their choices might be driven more by immediate gratification or self-interest. Their ego might lead them to make excuses, distort reality, rationalize decisions that aren't really in their best interest long term.
So understanding someone's self-esteem is like getting a glimpse into how they make decisions. It's pretty powerful stuff.
It is. And to really break it down, the book looks at how self-esteem impacts 6 key areas: type of interest, confidence, effort, beliefs, justification, and mood. The big 6, if you will, that are all heavily influenced by self-esteem.
All right, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. So let's break those down one by one. First up, type of interest. How does self-esteem affect that?
Well, it all comes down to short-term versus long-term thinking. People with lower self-esteem, they tend to focus on immediate gratification, that quick hit of pleasure or validation, even if it's not the best choice in the long run. Whereas those with higher self-esteem are more likely to think about the bigger picture, invest in their future, and consider the needs of others.
So someone with high self-esteem might be more willing to delay gratification, knowing it could lead to something better down the road.
Exactly. And this ties directly into confidence. Think of it this way. Confidence really hinges on interest. If someone is really interested in something but has low self-esteem, their confidence can just crumble so easily. They might second-guess themselves, get super anxious, which can lead to, some pretty erratic behavior.
Yeah, I know that feeling. When you really want something but you don't believe you deserve it or that you can achieve it, it can really mess with your head. Speaking of messing with your head, where does effort fit into all of this?
Well, those times when you really have to push through a challenge, people with high self-esteem are often more resilient, more persistent, even when things get tough.
It's like they have that inner belief that they can overcome obstacles, that I can do this attitude.
Exactly. And speaking of beliefs, they play a huge role in how we make decisions, whether they're true or not. Lieberman has this great example. If you believe lie detectors don't work, well, guess what? They won't work on you. It's the power of the mind.
That's wild. So our beliefs can actually shape our reality. It's a powerful thought. But what about when we make a not-so-great choice? How does self-esteem affect how we deal with that, how we justify our actions?
That's where justification and rationalization come in. It's all about reducing that guilt and maintaining a positive self-image, even if it means, twisting the truth a little bit. People with low self-esteem might be more likely to make excuses for their behavior, blame others for their mistakes. It's a way of protecting their ego, which might be a bit fragile.
It's like they need to create a story that makes them feel okay, even if it's not completely honest with themselves. Interesting. Okay, what about mood? How does that factor into all of this?
Mood can have a much stronger influence on people with low self-esteem. They might be really easily swayed by their emotions, let their current mood kind of dictate their actions, rather than sticking to their values or long-term goals.
So it's like their mood is in the driver's seat rather than their own internal compass. This whole SNP framework is pretty mind-blowing, honestly. But how do we actually figure out someone's self-esteem in the first place?
Yeah.
It seems like a tricky thing to gauge accurately.
You're right. It's not always super obvious. That's why Lieberman dedicates a whole chapter to what he calls the self-esteem detector. The key, I think, is this. True self-esteem is reflected in how a person treats both themselves and others.
So it's not just about being nice or generous on the surface. There's more to it than that.
Exactly. It's about the motivation behind those actions. Are they being kind out of genuine care, or because they're seeking approval? Are they taking care of their own needs while also being respectful of the needs of others?
That's a good point. It's easy to misinterpret someone's actions if you're not paying attention to those subtle cues. Now, you mentioned earlier that there are actually two types of low self-esteem.
Yeah, and they can be pretty different in how they show up. There's what Lieberman calls the LEA, that's the assertive, demanding type, who often kind of masks their insecurity with this facade of dominance. And then there's the LED, the dependent, pleasing type, who's always craving approval, validation from others. They both stem from low self-worth, but they cope with it in different ways.
Okay, give me a visual here. What would these types actually look like in real life?
Okay, so let's say you're at work. You know that coworker who always needs to be right, who steamrolls over everyone in meetings, or who's super quick to point fingers when things go wrong. That could be your LEA in action. They need to be seen as competent, on top of things, even if it means putting others down.
The classic, I'm in charge, even if I'm secretly freaking out inside. I've definitely worked with a few of those. What about the LED? How do they typically act?
Think about that friend who's always saying yes to everything, even when they're totally overwhelmed. Or the one who's always fishing for compliments. They might be super sensitive to criticism because their self-worth is so tied to what other people think.
Wow, this is really making me think about some of the people in my life. It's like those patterns were always there, but I just didn't have the right lens to see them clearly. Okay, so we've talked about these speed reading techniques in the whole SNP framework, which is incredibly insightful. But how do we actually put it all together? How do we actually use this to predict behavior in real-world situations?
That's where it gets really fun. Lieberman actually walks us through a bunch of different scenarios, showing how specific combinations of these colors, self-esteem, confidence, interest, and all that lead to pretty predictable outcomes. He analyzes things like poker games, job interviews, even jury selection.
Okay, the poker game example sounds really interesting. Can we dive into that one?
Sure. So imagine you're playing poker, right? And you've been observing your opponent, and you've determined they have low self-esteem, high confidence, and a strong interest in the game. What does that tell you?
Well, I'm guessing their ego is really tied to their performance at the poker table, so winning would be a huge boost to their self-worth.
Exactly. So how might that knowledge influence your strategy?
Well, knowing that their egos is on the line, I might try to raise the stakes, make them feel the pressure. If their confidence starts to crack, I'll know I have the upper hand.
See? That's exactly the kind of insight this book can give you. By understanding their motivations, you can kind of anticipate their reactions and adjust your approach accordingly. It's like having a secret weapon in those social situations.
I love it. It's like you're playing 4D chess with human behavior. Okay, let's try another scenario. What about a job interview? How would these principles apply there?
All right, so let's say you're the interviewer, and you've determined that the candidate has high self-esteem, low confidence, and really high interest in the job. What does that combination tell you?
Well, the high self-esteem tells me they have a solid sense of their own worth. But the low confidence might mean they're doubting their abilities for this particular job, maybe.
Right, and that high interest, that shows they're really eager for this opportunity. So how would you approach the interview knowing all of that?
I think I'd focus on making them feel comfortable, maybe highlight their transferable skills, their past successes, help them see that their experience is valuable, even if they're not feeling super confident right now.
Exactly. It's about understanding where they're coming from and tailoring your approach to meet their needs.
This is making me rethink how I approach all sorts of interactions. I'm realizing how often we jump to conclusions or misinterpret behavior based on, just what we see on the surface.
It's all about peeling back those layers, understanding those core motivations. And honestly, the more you practice these skills, the more intuitive they become. You start to see those patterns emerge almost naturally.
Okay, last scenario. Jury selection. This one sounds particularly fascinating. How does S&P come into play in that kind of legal setting?
Okay, so let's say you're a defense attorney and you're trying to pick a jury for this really high-profile case. You observe that a potential juror has low self-esteem, low confidence, and just zero interest in the case. What does that tell you?
Well, low self-esteem, that suggests to me that they might be easily swayed, by strong personalities. And the low confidence combined with low interest makes me think they might not be fully engaged in the proceedings or really give the case their full attention.
Exactly. So as a defense attorney, that might be a juror you'd want to avoid. They might be too easily influenced by the prosecution's arguments or not have the mental stamina to really weigh the evidence carefully.
This S&P framework is incredible. It's like having X-ray vision into people's minds. It's making me realize just how much we can learn about someone by observing their behavior and applying these psychological principles.
It's all about decoding that subtle language of human behavior. And the best part is, it's a skill anyone can develop with practice and attention.
This has been an incredible journey into You Can Read Anyone. We've covered those quick speed reading techniques, the whole S&P framework, and how to use these principles in so many real-life situations. I feel like I've learned so much.
And remember, this is really just the beginning. The book has tons more insights and techniques for navigating the complexities of, just being human and interacting with other humans.
What's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember from this deep dive?
For me, I think the biggest takeaway is really just pay attention to how people react when things get tough, when circumstances change. That'll often tell you more about their self-esteem, their motivations, than their words ever could.
Yeah, it's like you see their true colors come out in those moments of truth.
Exactly. Think about it. How does someone handle a setback? Do they get all defensive, blame other people, or do they take responsibility, look for solutions? What about when they get criticized? Do they shut down, or do they try to learn from it?
It's those reactions that really reveal their character.
Right. And by observing those reactions, you get a much deeper understanding of what really drives them, how they see the world, how they navigate the world.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into You Can Read Anyone. We've covered so much ground, from those quick speed reading techniques to the S&P framework, and how to actually apply those principles in real-world situations. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for understanding people.
That's great. And remember, like we said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The book is packed with even more insights and techniques for navigating, well, the beautiful mess that is human interaction.
We've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about today. Oh, you know what? There's this one last thought from the book that really stuck with me. It says, when the stakes are high, do more than simply put the odds in your favor. Set up the game so you can't lose.
That's a powerful one. It's all about preparation, right?
Yeah.
Understanding the players, anticipating the moves.
It's like you're becoming a master strategist in the game of life.
Exactly. And with the insights from You Can Read Anyone, you're well on your way.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of human behavior. Until next time, happy reading.